Hey, Tony Morelan here with the Samsung Developer Program. A little while back, I created a collection of lifestyle photos to help designers and developers sell their apps on the Galaxy Store. The photos are what I call smart photos, and this is where Photoshop takes your watch face design or your app design and quickly superimposes it onto the watch in the lifestyle photo, adding the correct depth of field, blurriness, shading, all of it done to give it a nice realistic look, done automatically. If you want, you can read my blog, which is linked to in the description below, or even download the collection of photos. But I thought it would be fun to show you how I built these smart object photos so that you can create your own lifestyle pictures. Let me show you how that's done. The first thing you need to do is take a picture. Think of a background that tells a story. When people are shopping for apps, they want to connect with the app. They want to imagine themselves using the app. For this photo, I grabbed my guitar. Let's say my design has a bit of an edge to it. So, the concept of music as well as the highlights of the guitar will, bring out that edge. The first thing you need to do is clean the surfaces. Whatever smudges or dust marks you can remove now will just mean fewer touch-ups in Photoshop later. You'll also want to select a watch face for the watch that has traditional bezel marks on it for hours. This will come in handy later when we're adjusting the angles in Photoshop. Make sure your camera settings are set to the highest quality possible. It's nice to crop your photos later, and if you take them large, this will give you the most flexibility. If you're using your phone to take the photo, check to see if it has a Pro mode. This will often give you more control over the photo, like manual blur. I'm using a Samsung phone, and it has this nice feature where I move the manual focus, I get little green lines on the edges of what is in focus. When you're positioning your watch, you want your photo to have depth to it, so think angles. Don't just take the photo straight down. You'll need to get your photo off your phone to your computer, so you can either email it to your computer or pull the SD card out or connect your phone to the computer and transfer it that way. All right, so let's open the picture in Photoshop, and the first thing we're going to want to do is crop it and resize it to the dimensions for screenshots on the Galaxy Store. So an easy way to do that first is to duplicate your background layer. This will allow me to reposition it within the window after I crop it. I'm going to go to Image and then to Canvas Size. And I'm going to set the dimensions at 1920 for the width and 3840 for the height. That will crop my image. But because I had duplicated that layer, I can now freely move this layer within the window there. Now, generally you don't want to enlarge your pictures within Photoshop because you'll lose quality, but truthfully, because this is shown on a phone, honestly the resolution looks pretty good even though you enlarge it. So we're going to go ahead and just reposition this a bit, resize. Something about like, that looks pretty good. Okay. So the next step is we want to create a layer that will represent our watch face that we're going to be bringing in. So I'm going to create a new layer, and I'm going to take the circle marquee and make a perfect symmetrical circle. And then I'm going to fill that circle with a bright color. So we're going to go with this nice bright green. Perfect. I'm going to now make this layer into a smart object. You do that by right-clicking on the layer and select Convert to Smart Object. What this does, in a sense, is it's going to take this layer and turn it into another Photoshop file that is embedded into this Photoshop file. And if you notice, I can now double-click on this layer, and it opens up a second Photoshop file. Now, what you're going to want to do with this file is we need to add some lines. We need to add a line for each axis. So I am going to grab my pen tool here, and I'm going to draw a vertical line. I'm going to create another layer, and I'm going to draw a horizontal line. Then I'm going to take all three layers, and I'm going to align them to the center. Perfect. I'm going to go ahead and merge that. And I'm going to save, and then I'm going to close. And you'll see we've got our circle there. I'm going to change the opacity to 50%. Okay. Now, one thing that's key when you're working in Photoshop is make sure you're saving your work as you are working within the file. You would hate for it to crash on you. So I'm going to go ahead and save this at this time. So now what we want to do is take this layer and distort it so that it aligns perfectly with the watch face in the photograph. So I'm going to go to Edit, go to Transform, and then I'm going to select Distort. Okay, this will allow me to individually move each of these anchor points. So what I'm going to do is make it so that that circle just lines perfectly with the watch face. So let me kind of bring this down here, bring that there. And let's go something like maybe like that. And like that. Just making some adjustments along the way. Now it's a little tricky to get it to align perfect, and truthfully, you're going to have a tough time getting it absolutely perfect. But you know what? In this case, close counts. So I want to make sure that my circle is covering up all of the watch face. So I'm just kind of looking at those edges. And I'm noticing my vertical line and my horizontal line are pretty darn close to perfect access for the vertical and horizontal. So that's going to work just nicely. I'm going to go ahead and apply that. All right, so the next step is to take your custom watch face and bring it into Photoshop. So I'm going to go ahead and select a design that I already had. I've just copied it to the computer memory. I'm going to open up that Smart Object layer, and I'm going to paste my design. Notice that it is not the exact size, which is okay. I'm just going to go ahead and enlarge that just a little bit. Again, we can get away with cheating on the on enlarging here. Perfect. I'm going to hide that green layer. It's not needed. I'm going to hit Save, and you'll notice when I go back, we're starting to see our watch face. I'm going to go ahead and bring that opacity all the way up. And there it is. So our watch face is at the dimension of the actual watch. Let me zoom into that a little closer. So there's still a few things about this watch face that don't quite look realistic to the photograph. And you can see what it is we've got depth of field. So the top of the photograph up here is a bit blurry, but down here it's nice and in focus. So what we can do is add some field blur to this. And you do that by going to the filter, going to the blur gallery, and select field blur. What field blur does is it allows you to have points on your graphic that you can control the blurriness. So I'm going to want to have field blur points at each of the 4 hour marks there. So this one down here, I'm going to select it, and I'm just going to click inside this little wheel here and take the blur down. Not all the way, but I'm going to bring it to about 2. And then this blur over here, let me make that a little bit less, but we're still keeping some nice blur to it. This one here, let's go about like that. And this is just a little bit too blurry, so we're just going to take a little bit of that off. Perfect. And then I'm going to come up to OK and just apply that field blur to it. That's looking really good. Okay, now another thing we're going to do is we're going to add a little noise to the watch face image to match the noise in the background. And noise is when you get that sort of graininess to the picture. You know, if we were to zoom in quite a bit, you can see there's a bit of graininess to the picture. And we want to make sure that our watch face that we brought in matches that graininess. So I'm going to go up to Filter, down to Noise. I'm going to add noise. I'm not going to put much in there. Let me actually go ahead and just change that to 3. But you'll be surprised that just adding a little bit of noise just starts to make it a little more realistic. And then another thing we're going to do is add an adjustment layer that will allow us to control the hue and saturation. So I come over here to this icon, select hue and saturation. One thing you want to do is select this icon in the lower left corner of my properties window. What that does is that applies this adjustment layer only to the layer that's below it and not to the entire Photoshop composition. So now you can see I can change the hue It's a great way, if you're taking a picture and it has a little more, red or a little more blue to it, you can adjust that as needed. So I'm going to make this a little more orange. You can also take some of the saturation down. Often when you're taking a picture, it's a little bit desaturated, so you wouldn't want to have something that is like extremely saturated like this. So I'm going to go ahead and take that down a bit into the negative range, probably something about like this, negative 10. Now you don't want to mess with the lightness. If you were to change the lightness, it starts to get a little bit unrealistic. So I tend to keep that at 0. If you felt like you wanted to darken it up a little bit, you can, but just be careful when you're playing with the lightness. Let me take it down. Yep, I'm going to leave that actually at 0. Perfect. All right, just going to do a little save, make sure we're always saving our work. All right, so that's basically it. Now, of course, you could always add a few more adjustment layers that have to do with like brightness and contrast and things like that. As long as you're doing those as adjustment layers, you'll have the flexibility to make adjustments to the values depending on the watch face that you've brought in. All right, so now let's bring in another watch face, and I'll show you how easily it will adapt to this picture. So I'm going to open up my smart object. Then I'm going to go over to another design that I have here. Just bringing it in. I'm just going to paste it there. Let me make it a little bit bigger so that it matches the size of the circle. We're going to go with something right about like that there. I'll go ahead and hide this layer here. Save it. Then I'm going to close. And look at that. Perfectly aligns with the watch face dimension. So, a few other things I would do to clean up this picture a bit is I'm going to go back to this background layer here. And, this little corner up here kind of bugs me a bit. So I'm just going to use my rubber stamp tool to clean that up a little bit. And then I'm going to look down here. There's some spots that appear, some dust particles. So it's real easy to take care of those dust spots by coming over here to the spot healing brush tool. And what you're going to do is I'm going to click and kind of hold and just sort of paint a little bit. And you can see they disappear right away. Now you don't want to go too crazy with this. Just kind of do the obvious spots that might be a little bit noticeable. You can see we've got some down here. There's this here. So it's a real quick, easy way to go ahead and clean up your picture. I think we're looking pretty good. Yeah. It's nice and clean. I got this one right here in the middle here. Let's see if we can get rid of that. There we go. Just a little bit better. Nice. Well, there you go. So you can see how easy it is to create your own custom lifestyle photo with smart objects that allows you to quickly bring in your own watch face designs and have it apply to the picture that you took. That's it, we're done. Now anytime you want to place a new watch face design into this picture, you just open up that smart object layer and paste your new watch face image into it, and Photoshop will do the rest. All right, now go have fun making your own photos, and be sure to post them on social using the hashtag #BeASamsungDev so that we can then share them to our community. All right, we'll see you around.